day. Salam and welcome to the final edition of WIEF's Idealab 2020 series. Think, Talk, Enticing Youth to Agribusiness. I know it's an interesting topic indeed, and that's why all of you are on our session today. We couldn't be more excited. So once again, welcome and thank you for being with us today. A big shout out to all of you joining us via Facebook Live as well. We see you and we hope that we'll be able to, of course, engage with you as well. But for those of you on Zoom session today, we'll want to also extend our Q&A session to all of you. That will be happening a little while later. I'll explain more as we go along. Now, of course, today's Idealab 2020 series, the topic, Think, Talk, Enticing Youth to Agribusiness. What we aim to uncover today, of course, to look at how we can better develop an entrepreneurial mindset in agriculture amongst the young people. Also, ways to engage youth in agriculture, perhaps also looking at how technology can assist this objective and aim, and finally how technology and agricultural companies that are already existing out there can come together, collaborate to build trust, to create new innovations and solutions as well. So of course, exciting indeed. And I'm Jessy Chahal, your moderator for today. Thank you very much for joining us. In a short bit, I'll bring on our featured guest as well as our speaker. I'm sure many of you will also have those questions that you'd like to post, so watch out for that Q&A box once again. The format's really simple today. We will have, of course, our guest artist serenade us with a song, after which we will, of course, open the discussion with our speaker. But before that, our speaker will be presenting a set of slides as well for all our better understanding. Now, if you're wondering, a recording will be emailed to you alongside with a copy of the presentation that will be made available on the official website of WIEF, so make sure you log on there if you'd like a copy. Now, today, of course, I'm joined by two prolific and inspiring people. I couldn't be more excited. We have, on the one hand, artist Nisa Adina, an incredible young contemporary R&B and pop violinist, composer and producer all the way from Sarawak here in Malaysia. She will serenade us with a tune shortly, and of course, our speaker for today is Darren Tan, Head of Education and Community Outreach, ComCrop, Singapore, who will join us with an insightful presentation as well. Right now, in fact, I'd like to bring on both my guests, if I can see you guys right here. Hi there, Darren. Hi there, Nisa. How's it going?
Hi, everyone.
Hi, thanks for being with us today. All right, so to kick things off, without further ado, I'm excited to present Miss Nisa Adina. She's been called Sarawak's musical gem. She represents the state of Sarawak and its culture through her music, having played various different styles from classical to R&B, pop, and even jazz to a global audience. While in Berklee College of Music, she has performed with various artists as well as recorded many compositions and arrangements. In 2011, Nisa was the first Malaysian to win the Junior Grand Champion in the category of an instrumentalist at the World Championships of Performing Arts in Los Angeles, gaining a spot in the Malaysian Book of Records. I could go on and on with her achievements, but I decided to cut it short right there. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you Nisa Adina with her rendition. We'll find out more about this beautiful piece once she's done sharing with us. Nisa, the stage is yours. Right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Nisa. Indeed, that was a beautiful performance. We're getting some, of course, comments as well. They're calling it beautiful. They also say it's a calming performance. Amazing work, Nisa. Perhaps you could walk us through this piece that you have, of course, created. It sounded like it was a journey of some kind of exploration.
Yes. So I wrote this during a creative workshop camp. It was a camp for string players like me, and it was for classical or anyone who wants to learn more contemporary styles, because usually string players, they start learning classical music, but not many string players can play contemporary styles. So that was like a nice place for everyone to learn from each other. So there was a composition workshop where we could learn a melody, we could write a melody of our own and develop it. And I decided to explore on odd time rhythms, and I decided to pay tribute to home because I was still in Boston at the time in the States, and I called it Bornean Rainforest.
It sure sounds like that. It takes you to the sort of the different vibes and flavors that one would feel, with all your senses and smell and see in a typical rainforest setting. Thank you very much, Nisa, for joining us today and, of course, treating us to this wonderful performance. We wish you all the very best, and do stay on as we explore discussion today with our following guests. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, that was Nisa Adina, of course, serenading us with that music. Nisa, keep making the good music and keep making us proud. Well, it's time to get to the crux of our discussion here today, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, enticing youth to agribusiness. What does this mean? What does this entail? To tell us more and, of course, to give us a wider and deeper understanding, it gives me great pleasure to invite our speaker right now, Darren Tan. Darren, welcome.
Hi, Jessy. Thank you.
Hi.
Good to see you.
How's it going? I know you've been pretty busy.
It has been busy. period, and I think with this situation around the world, it's everyone's just trying to cope and adapt to what everyone calls the new normal. So it's
That's
quite
right.
interesting. Yeah.
That's right. Well, I'd like to give everyone a sort of a brief introduction to Darren as well. Darren heads the education and community outreach efforts at ComCrop, which is Singapore's first and only AVA licensed rooftop greenhouse farm. I'm sure he'll tell us more about that in a short while. What he does, he ensures the continuity of knowledge to the next generation of farmers, as well as to help the farm stay relevant and supportive of the community that they are in. Now, Darren was awarded the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative Professional Fellowship by the American Department of State back in 2017, and he has represented his country, Singapore, on an exchange focusing on environmental sustainability. So, Darren, without any further ado, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jessy. I'm just going to be sharing my screen. Hopefully this comes out for everyone. Is that okay?
Looks great.
All right, thank you. So good day, everyone. And so like Jessy mentioned, my name is Darren, and I'm from ComCrop. We're a high-tech farm in Singapore. We focus on converting underutilized land into productive and inclusive spaces. And I'm very glad to be with you here today to talk about how we can bring youth to agribusiness. So we'll briefly talk about the context of the world that we live in now, which is prompting this agricultural revival and revolution. We have the need to then engage youth in agriculture for renewal, as well as I'll cover about using the example of ComCrop in Singapore to show how we have chosen to adapt to changing needs and in the process engage youth and the community. So a little bit about the context first. We currently live in what they call a VUCA world. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So at the start of this year, I would have used the term VUCA to be applied to events such as climate change, forest fires in Australia, rising sea levels, to things like Brexit and the Hong Kong protests and so on. But right now, with the current pandemic, I assume we can all relate when I say that the world is certainly quite volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So when we look at the world now with all the quarantines and mask wearing and social distancing, work from home arrangements, and even online events such as these, it's quite clear that things are very different from before. And in fact, if you think back to when the pandemic first started, when governments around the world started to issue stay-home advices, most people would have predicted that people would rush up to stock up on canned food or things like, bottled water or instant noodles. But not many would actually have said toilet paper. And this was something that was very, complex and unusual. People don't think about toilet paper as something that people go crazy over. So what this really means is that no one can be too sure about the impact of certain events. And one of the things that arose from the COVID-19 situation was the realization about the issue of food security in many countries. So in Asia, we are generally lucky that we have many neighboring countries generating a lot of food. So we can see that these countries also have a large share of their population involved in agriculture. But if you look a bit more closely and more carefully, you will realize that many of the countries in the world that have a large share of their population involved in agriculture are also developing countries. Sorry,
it's about to rain.
Yeah, it's a storm outside. Right, so so this means that as these countries develop, it is very likely that more of the population move on to jobs in sectors that appear more prestigious or perhaps pay more, right? I think people talk about Southeast Asia or Asia in general as having one of the fastest growing middle classes in the world. And this brings about, of course, certain issues, right? In this slide, we can see the perception of various professions in America. So occupations like doctors, scientists, engineers generally rank quite high in terms of prestige, while you don't see any farmers on this list. Of course, this is not unusual, right? Because how many of us here will claim to have parents who told us, go to school, study hard, get a degree and be a farmer? That usually doesn't happen.
Right.
And you can see that for a developed country like the US, the agricultural industry also employs a very tiny percentage of youth between 16 and 19. Of course, various factors play a part in this. So at that age, you also have youth that might be likely to be looking for jobs during their summer breaks, and slogging it out in the fields may not be the ideal way to spend their time, especially when it's on holiday. So more importantly, it is not that the agricultural industry is becoming stale, right? Because we've sort of seen a revival of sorts for agriculture with advancements in growing techniques, advancements in AI, meaning that we are no longer bound by location and weather when producing food. Between 2012 and 2017, the asset size of investments specializing in food and agricultural assets jumped from 27 billion US dollars to 73 billion. So that's about 25% every year. So this has led to innovations like plant factories, like what we see on the slide, in the slide on the left. You have rooftop farms and even underground farms. So this, the bottom right picture is a picture taken from one of the underground farms in the UK, where they use one of the underground railway tunnels to convert into a farm. So this means that agriculture is really a very fast-growing industry, and therefore it becomes even more important that we then continue to engage youth. So why do we even bother to focus about youth? So first of all, we know that youth have the ability and passion to be heard, and with social media, they have the means to gather support very quickly. So this is of course very important to have them on your side. And as the second and the future generation of leaders, youth choices and buy-in are extremely crucial to policies being effective. And of course, last but not least, we always value youth for the way that they can dedicate their energy to the passions. By investing in the youth of today, essentially, we are planting the seeds of tomorrow's success. Now we'll share a little bit about ComCrop and how we work towards engaging youth in agriculture. Before I do so, allow me to share a little bit about Singapore's context so that you can better understand our decisions. So here you can see Singapore, what people call the little red dot. We are a tiny island with no hinterland, no natural resources, and therefore we are very, very heavily dependent on trade. Because of this, the majority of the land in Singapore is allocated to either residential, which are the areas in beige here you can see, or industry, which are the areas in pink. So there are open spaces for recreation and agriculture, which are the areas in green, but these are typically either nature reserves or water catchment areas. So in fact, only about 1% of our land is dedicated to agriculture, and this produces about 10% of our total consumption. So quite worrying figures. And as a result, this presents a very unique situation for us in terms of carbon footprint of food miles, food wastage due to how far the food needs to travel to reach us, and also limitations in terms of our land and production capacity. So to address this unique problem, what ComCrop tries to do is to operate multiple farms across the country to feed the community. Therefore, that's how the name ComCrop comes about, because we actually started off as community farm. So it's actually short for community crops. We look at enabling meaningful work for people such as senior citizens and people with disabilities, as well as spread awareness about Singapore's food production. A little bit of history about us: we actually started off in 2011 as a community farm, and we realized that community farms are always dependent on people volunteering. On people volunteering the money, the time and resources. And more importantly, the production quantities were seldom very consistent, and so we needed to find a more sustainable way of continuing the project. In 2013, we created Singapore's first rooftop farm. So this was built on top of a shopping center in Orchard Road, which is Singapore's shopping belt. So there we produce fresh herbs and vegetables for the nearby restaurants. In 2018, we built a much larger farm, this time on the rooftop of a food processing hub. So if you can see this picture here is actually on the rooftop of this very large building. If you look at the background, you can sort of see some of those housing blocks that are roughly the same height as this. So we focus a lot on producing leafy vegetables because this is a key concern in Singapore's food security, because generally leafy vegetables have a very short shelf life. And on the farm, we also then work with people with dementia who take on jobs such as transplanting or seeding. The company is also the vehicle through which we engage with 3P partnerships. We work with organizations to tailor work for people with disabilities, and we raise awareness through workshops. So more importantly, we also have had the chance to shape ministry-level policy through youth circles, which is a group of passionate people working closely with the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment and also the National Youth Council to guide decision-making processes. I was invited to be a mentor for the Youth Action Challenge, which aims to empower youth in ground-up initiatives for the community. So through these partnerships, we engage with youth and give them a chance to learn about the industry and also allow them, the opportunity to influence policy change. I would probably go so far to say that the youth of today are really more attracted to the sense of agency, the feeling that they can make a change, just like probably rather than the indicators of, success that we come to associate, which are like high salaries and corner offices. The youth of today, I think they do want something different. So just very quickly rounding up, the key messages that I hope you take away from today are these, that firstly, there is a very clear shift towards agribusiness, and youth should continue to be the focus. By focusing on them, we can look beyond the typical monetary incentives and instead see where they feel most inspired to contribute. And lastly, because there are so many levels where youth can make a difference, there are a lot of opportunities that they can then get involved in the agribusiness. So finally, I would like to leave you with this quote that says that don't judge each day by the harvest that you reap, but by the seeds that you plant. So our youth are essentially the seeds of tomorrow's success, and I hope we continue to keep planting. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darren. I think some very good and salient points there in your sharing. And I just wanted to reiterate a few of those. But just before that, just to remind everyone that the Q&A box is open. Do leave your questions there. We'll try to pick them up. The question that has the most likes will be selected firstly. So please feel free to blast your questions on there, and I'll pick them up towards the end of the hour after my conversation with Darren sort of tapers down. We will be picking up your questions as well. So nonetheless, please leave them there. Also leave your comments if you have any. And someone has just asked, the presentation will be on the website, WIEF's website, and the recording of today's program will be emailed to you as well. So Darren, going back to the conversation, or rather your presentation earlier, it was quite interesting that you pointed out sort of the Western versus Asian approach. Could you just give us a quick insight into that? What the Asian mentality is a little bit different as we approach it, especially Asian parents, right? When you're approaching something like agriculture or agribusiness, what would you say would have been some of the hurdles, and in that as well, some solutions to help the buy-in of our extended family?
Right, I think the shift has to take place at multiple levels. It's not just about saying that, parents need to rethink how they approach the prestige of certain jobs, but really it's that the whole industry has to shift. For very long, we have, as a society, we have placed a lot of importance on money and things. So therefore, things like lawyers, where related to law, you have your bankers that deal with money. They are seen as very prestigious jobs. But at the end of the day, what has been really essential for us as human beings to continue to evolve and survive are really the continuity of food. So that's something that unfortunately people have not been able to see yet. We are starting to see the shift now with climate change affecting food production, with issues like the COVID pandemic really changing how people view the importance of food.
Right.
That has changed quite a bit.
But you do say that youth, they have the voice, they have the drive, and of course interest in their well-being in the future as well. You also had pointed out in your presentation the fact that they have the ability and passion, and they want to have a sense of agency to be an agent of change.
Yes, yes. So exactly, we have a lot of youths who reach out to us, and it's very interesting because when I was younger, I always assumed that when we did internships, it's sort of like or attachment of part-time work. It's sort of like I have something to do in the holidays. Let me earn some money and pocket money, and I can then go out and enjoy myself. But the youths nowadays are quite different. They come to us and they say, "Look, I don't mind working hard. I don't mind if you can't pay me, like what a bank might pay me or what data entry class might pay me and things like that. But I want to get the experience. I want to understand what is happening on the ground." And, they're really involved and interested in climate change matters, environmental sustainability, and they're very well read. So it's really quite important that we continue to then allow them to have a chance to learn, because if not, they will reach a point where they say, I've tried and I've been very interested, I've been speaking out, but nobody is listening to me, nobody's doing anything, nobody's willing to let me take a chance. At some point, they're going to get disillusioned, and I don't think that's the ideal state.
Right. So sort of on that point as well, what do you feel are some of the misconceptions around the business of whether it's going into farming or anything related to agribusiness? Would you say from the onset that there are some misconceptions?
Definitely. We are at a point where the misconceptions are coming in from both corners. So one part of the spectrum, one end of the spectrum, is the traditional view that agribusiness tends to be messy. You don't get very much money, it's dirty, it's dangerous, and things like that because you're out in the sun or that kind of things. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people who think that it's just extremely sexy, it's like the next tech bubble and things like that. And then they come in not expecting to do any work at all. So that's really the both ends of the spectrum. The reality is somewhere in the middle. It's true that at the end of the day, agriculture is still tough work, really, because growing stuff is not easy, right? There has never been an easy way to really grow food. Even now, they're trying to grow it in labs, but that's not easy at all. And there's nothing glamorous about getting down and dirty and really making the effort to produce food for people, because you think about it, the amount of food that we consume nowadays is amazing. It's a lot.
And there's a lot of wastage as well in that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So as we move forward into those points that you have made, what would you say is the potential? Meaning to say, from where we are right now, a couple of months ago, at the beginning of 2020, no one saw this coming in this magnitude, right?
Yeah.
And as you say, the crisis has brought on a revival and a renewal in this sector. So looking forward, perhaps a 5 or 10 year sort of lens forward, what would you say is the potential of this business?
So I think I did mention that investments are pouring into the industry. So definitely there's a lot of potential for growth. I do also caution that, as with the the fintech bubble and the .com bubble and things like that, just because money is pouring in doesn't mean that everybody is going to be successful. Because really, at the end of the day, if you can have the best technology in the world, but if you don't understand the science and the nature of growing, you won't be able to produce vegetables. So you could program the best AI, but if you don't have the data, the real data to input into the AI, there can't be any learning that needs to take place. So it needs to be a marrying of experience, real growing experience with the dedication to grow food, combined with the ability to look at technology and say, how can I leverage this technology, and then change and improve some of the processes that we are already doing.
Right, but you talk about experience, and I just want to say for those who are just only exploring the idea of just wanting to break into the market, so to say, what would be that starting point?
It's always good to just start small. So, for example, like myself, I don't have a degree in agriculture. I don't have a degree related to anything about growing. Right? I'm actually just a physics major, but the ability to and the willingness to learn and try and allow yourself to learn from other people, to speak to other people, and then expand from there. That is really what I think we're looking for. And even when we look at people who are coming on to join the team, we're not looking for people with experience because, realistically speaking, how many youths out there have experience in farming? But really what we want to see is the ability to look at a problem, figure out, do the background checks, be willing to put in the hard work to understand the crux of the matter, and then adapt from there. So that sort of thinking and attitude is very important.
All right. So at that starting point, firstly, how do we develop sort of an entrepreneurial mindset to attract youth? And I think this is sort of two questions in one. Beyond that, how would you even begin to attract youth towards the nature of this business? As you pointed out in your presentation as well, parents and even youth kind of price themselves on what we call success indicators. So what would be that starting point again in terms of attracting them, and what would be the best ways to develop the mindset, speaking from sort of peer to peer, where you were at that point as well? As you said, this is not something you studied, it's not something you thought, oh, I'm gonna explore this. It happened perhaps maybe by chance.
A little bit like that. So I would say that really we have many different opportunities to engage youth, right? I have plenty of you who come to us and they say, I want to do something. And I ask them, what do you want to do? And they say, oh, I'm not sure, I just want to do something. And so it's open conversations like these where you try to figure out, okay, are you interested in the operations of growing? Are you interested in the science of growing? Are you interested in processes? Are you interested in education, for example? Are you interested in going out and speaking to people, partnerships, working with people with physical disabilities? I would say that, the skill sets and the values that the youth have can be put to many good use at different parts of the business. So, I do also agree that for far too long, especially with the Asian sort of mindset, we have certain mindsets about what constitutes success and things like that. I also dare say that the youth of today are quite refreshing. They look beyond just money. They look beyond just titles. There are still many who do. But
I'm gonna jump in here though. Help us have a better picture. Paint us a better picture. What are the opportunities within the agriculture or agri-business sector? I mean, one would assume it's merely farming leafy greens, but you and I know that is not. That's perhaps just one aspect of it.
Sure.
What is the length and breadth of the opportunities that lie within the sector, and perhaps areas that has not even been explored yet, Darren?
Right. So we'll start from the easiest, right, which is just doing the hard work. Then there's, of course, the research areas, right? So people who are interested in academic research, there's a whole industry that's coming up about that. There's the whole thing about automation. So that's to do with the engineering and people doing mechanical and things like that. You have figuring out controlled environment agriculture. So you could look at how do I build the best building that can include, some of these farming together with other activities. And you have even like, for example, the programming side where people are doing AI, figuring out what are the best conditions that the plant needs, how do you tailor the growing conditions, all the way to the very soft skills, which is working with people, figuring out, where are the jobs in agriculture that could be opened up to allow people with disabilities to work instead of just, you know, the regular farm workers and things like that? How can we make it more inclusive? How can we change how people buy produce?
Right.
Instead of,
In itself is an exercise, because prior to this, it was not that. Agriculture was a very sort of back end, perhaps unappealing to,
in a sense, you know, most people for many years, I think even with our youth nowadays, you can ask them, where do vegetables come from, and they'll say, oh, supermarket. and it's really, there's that huge disconnect with the growing of crops. And I think that once we open it up and get people to understand that there are a lot of opportunities, then the mindset starts to change.
All right, I just wanted to read out a poll that's come up. Would like you to answer that to all our participants today. Which of the following is a best practice to engage youth in agriculture? We want to hear from you. You tell us what's the best way forward. Is it put agriculture on the school syllabus, or is it improve agriculture's image amongst young people, or facilitate access to land and credit? Perhaps we can discuss this quite quickly, Darren. What do you think the answer is, or is it a combination of all?
I'm going to be a bit greedy and say that actually it's all. We really need to see how our concept and our relationship with food first started when we were early nomads all the way till now. So in the early days, people moved around a lot, and they would set up camps near to rivers because that's where you have access to water. From there, you know, towns and cities grew, and you do your farming. With industrial agriculture, what I meant was that we started to push the farms out further away from the cities, and then because of improvement in cold chain, you can now, you know, ship. You can have the farm very far away, and you can ship things over. But of course, that has changed, you know, and that has generated some mindsets about how we approach food. We are used to vegetables being quite plentiful and quite cheap. We don't see the effort that goes into that, and therefore we don't appreciate some of the value of these things.
I think that's a good point. We don't appreciate because we don't see. Therefore, we don't know. And it's funny because it took a pandemic for us to realize how we're so reliant on this. And it's a sector where whatever age you are, practically, you can start to grow your own food.
Yeah, exactly right. You know, I remember when I was younger, we did those science experiments where you would grow bean sprouts in little cups and things like that. But we never went so far to say, I'm going to grow them slightly larger and eat them, right? And I think that being able to do that actually allows people to then understand, you know, it takes so much effort to just grow one or two small little vegetables that I can eat. What about, you know, every day I'm eating? What about this plate of vegetables that I'm
eating? And so you spoke about, you know, in terms of AI as well, and how that can really assist us and help farmers, whatever age you are, to explore this sector. So what are some innovations that you are hopeful to see emerge that will help with productivity and efficiency in this sector? Perhaps even before that, you could share with some of the innovations that are already existing, which you think are quite groundbreaking.
I'll be very honest, and actually, when you look at the industry now, the concepts of hydroponics have been around since the 1970s, and that hasn't changed very, very much. You know, the concept that you can dissolve nutrients in water, replicate some of these you know, situations in soil, and grow them in places that they don't typically grow. That's been around for quite a while. Due to programming, due to technology, we can now stack them. You know, we have LED lighting, we have solar panels and things like that. So we can shift a lot of these things all over the place. But we're still very bound by the nature of a plant, which is that it still needs to grow from seed all the way to an actual plant.
But at this point, Darren, it seems to me that, you know, although these ideas are grandiose, it seems like cost is a big issue. Even if you are running a small farm of your own, or you want to embark into this, it seems like cost is still a big issue. Yeah,
it always is, you know. I always talk about the whole spectrum, right? On one end is the low cost low entry level of soil-based farming. You can just start small, a few plots of land and things like that. Then once you start to go into the high-tech agriculture, it always, of course, becomes a lot more expensive. But there is a significant shift of the entry level price, barriers to entry, really, because the costs are coming down. There's a lot of manufacturing and automation that's happening. So all these are starting to come down. So, you know, it's becoming easier to enter the market, but more importantly, we do need to not get too seduced by the concept that technology is the answer, because you do need a spectrum of experience. So it's really good to just learn from all the different places.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, we'll move on. I've got a couple of questions for you, but we're also getting many questions from our participants today. Let's look at perhaps what is really existing. How can tech companies and agriculture companies that are really existent in the market come together and try to collaborate to create new solutions?
Yeah. So this is quite interesting, because if you look at the investments that have come into the industry, a lot of these investments focus on the tech companies. And tech companies may or may not have experience in growing, whereas agricultural companies tend to focus very much on keeping things consistent and keeping it running. I feel that there needs to be a middle point where the two actually work a lot closer together, because tech companies will focus on the mechanisms, right? Whereas the agricultural companies will focus on the end product, which are the vegetables. If you can sort of marry the two and tweak the technology to focus on the product, that would be a lot better, I find.
And so in this day and age, we know, a crisis may occur again, as we are in the middle and in the thick of a global crisis right now.
Sure.
Do you think a farm is sort of crisis proof? Can it remain and continue to remain sustainable in the event of another future crisis?
I don't think anything is crisis proof. I think the way things are, there are always unforeseen circumstances that can come up. So for example, for the farm, for ComCrop, we were set up with the idea that we would buffer Singapore's self-sufficiency. And when the lockdowns across many of the countries came about, we were saying, okay, we'll be all right because we're still producing vegetables. What we didn't anticipate was other issues. So for example, some of our packaging came in from other countries, and that was stopped, right? We had the logistics companies where a lot of their drivers were employed from other countries, and they too were stuck. And so suddenly there was a breakdown in the delivery system. So there will always be issues like this that crop up, and there will always be unforeseen circumstances. But it's really about how you then adapt. You can build it to be almost crisis-proof as much as you can, but something will always come along. It's how you then address the problem then.
All right, we're pressed for time, so I'm going to quickly look at some of the questions that's come through from our participants, Darren. As a youth, I'm very interested in venturing into agribusiness. This question comes from an anonymous attendee, but he or she says, I'm lacking capital. Can you suggest a few agriculture activities which require minimal amount of capital for me to start with? Right.
So this is a very, very common question that I get asked a lot. It's like, I want to get into high-tech farming, but I also understand that, high-tech farming seems to require a lot of capital to set up. But really what is important here is to focus on starting small. It doesn't cost very much to buy some of the equipment, and you can start it at home, right? Or you can find a cheap piece of land, or very low cost piece of land, or maybe some factory that no one uses. You can start there. As long as you can prove that whatever that you are doing is working, whatever you are doing is scalable, I think there will be no lack of people who want to come in and invest and share the capital with you.
Right. I have another question here, or rather a statement from Ian, who says it's the same problems they face in the UK. So he says, are case studies of youth making a career of it the best path? Are there perhaps any case studies besides yourself, Darren, as a successful story?
I think at this point it's still quite early to say. It's of course very tricky, because the reason why a lot of the romantic image that people have is also to do with branding, because some farms have tried to go the sort of very nostalgic route about how the produce is lovingly farmed by hand, and you have people doing that. So that's a sort of image that has come about. I don't know how it's slowly going to shift, because at some point you cannot feed off romantic images. You're going to still need vegetables and food to eat, and at this point large scale production is still the one that gives us economies of scale and is then able to provide amounts of food for.
Right. Have you started to export your produce at this point?
We haven't, because like I mentioned, in Singapore we only produce about 10% of our local consumption. Even if I double my production, I think the local consumption still more than makes up for it. I hope at some point we will be able to,
But I guess a very cheeky question, is it lucrative enough, Darren?
It is, and really it's about, I mean, of course there are no extremely rich farmers. You're not going to be the sort of getting the money that bankers at the moment are getting. But at some point, you have to realize that the economies of scale start to add up, firstly. And secondly, the price of food will not always stay the same. Like I mentioned, if you look at the overall context, it's a very fast growing middle class population. And at some point, the need for fresh and healthy vegetables will start to increase, and you'll start to see that the cost of living and the cost of average vegetables will start to go up as well.
So you bring up the middle class, the M40, and here's a question from Jessy Chahal saying, or rather asking, any plant suggestion on plant and technique for indoor farming for B40 people?
B40 meaning?
The bottom 40
right.
category.
Okay, so I think in the presentation that I did, I was very careful to make it clear that some of the suggestions that on how we have solved problems applies for Singapore. I would not recommend, for example, extremely high-tech farms in maybe let's just say Malaysia, right? You have plenty of land, you have plenty of labor. You don't need to go into high-tech at this point. You can always start with regular farming techniques. You could supplement with some of the lighting. You could experiment a hybrid system where you have some controlled environment. You don't have to go full indoor, because full indoor is really for countries or for places that have almost no land to do regular farming. So it's about adapting the solutions to the context and figuring out which is most useful for you.
Right. In your opinion, Darren, this comes from another anonymous attendee. How promising is the future of agribusiness, and how long would we have to persevere before we can reap what we sow in terms of cash?
I think we are at a point where people are really starting to come around with regard to food. And I hate to say it this way, but the pandemic has really done some things to change people's mindsets, and we are really just starting to see that people are waking up to the importance of food. At some point you have a lot of money, but if you can't get that food to your plate, that money is just a number, right? So that's where I don't want to say that I hope for another pandemic. I don't want to say that I hope for disasters, but we have to see that the climate change is happening, and these things are not guaranteed.
There's a 28-year-old who wants to ask that living in the city, what do you think about urban farming? Is the prospect as lucrative as traditional farming, considering the capital spent for urban farming is higher? That's a pretty good question.
Yeah, so it's always a trade-off, like I said. If you go to traditional farming, the cost of the barriers to entry are lower. The operating costs are of course lower, but the produce, the kind of money that you can get for the produce are often lower as well. When you go into urban farming, if you can shorten the timing from your harvest to when your consumers get the vegetables, generally there is a premium on that, on fresh and healthier vegetables. So it sort of works out in the end, but you must get economies of scale, and you must apply it, of course, to the context that you're in. You know, if you set,
Right.
I was going to say, if you set up in a place that doesn't eat vegetables, then of course it's not going to be very efficient or lucrative.
Right. A while earlier, you had mentioned about skills, or whether it's upskilling or reskilling yourself. What would you say about this area? And of course, if you could speak perhaps a little bit more broader than just Singapore, what do you think are some of the skills or the grants that's been made available? Because one question here from Giselle says, do you need to take a bachelor course in agribusiness or take a TESDA course? Is it necessary to have a diploma before building an agribusiness?
I don't believe it is. I think agribusiness is just like any other business. It's a lot about common sense. You know, if you're spending $10 to grow a plant that you sell for $2, that's obviously not very good business. I think it's a lot about understanding and being willing to try and learn. So that's a lot of perseverance there.
And would you see any particular kind of produce that's sort of more catered for Malaysian, Singaporean, or other Asian countries in terms of consumption, vis-a-vis a lot of the other export produce that we see? Are we trying to fill in that gap? Is there enough local supply, or is it a bit of both?
It's a bit of both, really, because I mean, our countries are quite similar. We consume a lot of the Asian leafy vegetables. Of course, because of the differences between the average citizen and maybe some of those with more purchasing power, the kind of things that they consume might be quite different. And so it's really up to the farm to say, okay, I want to target those of us who are just average consumers, or I want to target those of the people who are willing to pay a much larger premium. It really depends on what you want as a farm and where do your values lie.
In terms of from your experience, how do you find business in terms of, do you knock on people's doors to find more clients or customers? Do you use the route of the retail chain? What are some of your approaches?
We are trying many different approaches. At the moment, we still stick to what is quite common in most countries, where there are already developed networks where you can sell the produce. So either to restaurants, you could go through a distributor, or you can sell directly to the supermarkets. Eventually, I feel that as decentralized farms become more commonplace, then there may be another network where the farms can start to sell directly to the community around that. But that takes some time.
How would you support sort of the supply chain? Do you need to invest in that as well, in terms of how you would transport the goods from a logistics perspective?
I actually want to say that we should just disrupt the whole logistical supply chain, because with decentralized farms, what it means is that you never are very, very far from the consumers, and therefore you can then decentralize a lot of this. Maybe you can just have people who are staying nearby to do some of this transporting for you, right? Because we are moving a bit into the gig economy. There are a lot of resources that are underutilized, and people are willing to use these resources in exchange for some monetary payment. So you could then pay people in the community to then ship it to maybe this block or this estate and things like that. That could happen. So that sort of disrupts the whole idea of how the supply chain typically works.
One question from another anonymous person is, in your farm, do you still use synthetic fertilizers?
Right. So depends on how you want to think about it. I feel that there is a lot of misunderstanding about what are the nutrients that go into hydroponics. If you think about it, hydroponics is really replicating some of what is happening, or most of what is happening in the soil. So in the soil, you have your organic matter that's being broken down into like your nitrates, your phosphorus, your potassium. Those are done by the insects and the enzymes and the bacteria. On the farm, we do the same thing, except that we buy those that are already extracted and we dissolve them directly. So we are not dependent on some of these insects and things like that, because those processes take quite a lot of time. And essentially, when you look at it, a nitrate in the soil will be identical to the nitrates that we have in the water.
How have you learned this? Is this through trial and error, or is this
trial and error? It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of research. There are a lot of research papers out there, and therefore, I think, like I mentioned, hydroponics has been around since the 1970s. People have been doing so many tests about whether or not there's any difference and things like that. But essentially, if you're a plant, a molecule of nitrate is the same whether you're giving it in water or whether you're taking it from dissolved nitrates in the soil.
Right, Darren, one person asked that he or she is now doing traditional farming, thinking of turning that farm into an organic farm. Do you think this is a good idea, or should they do both traditional farming and organic farming at the same time in case one fails? Okay, so this is a very tricky question because it really depends on the country that you're in, because different countries have different organic standards. Some organic farms are not allowed to be next to traditional farms because there is the danger of some of the pesticide drift and things like that. So it really depends on, first of all, think about what is the cost of changing to an organic farm, because typically organic farms, your production productivity is a little bit less. It's usually about 70 or 80% of conventional farms. So that's one. Then second, you have to compare with how much more can you get from the produce if it is organic certified. And of course, there's the complexity of making sure that you meet the organic standards every other year. Yeah. We've got one final question before I come in with my final question. This is from MD Delwar. At present, IT-based services are triumphant in various startup competitions. The younger generation means IT-based services. Simply, agriculture entrepreneurs do not have much value in the field of young entrepreneurs. Your opinion?
I think, like I said, IT-based services are, of course, very sexy, right? And the idea of being out in the sun is seldom as seductive as some of these things. But it's really up to different people to see where the value is. There are some people who are very happy spending their lives as an academic doing studies. There are some people who, spend their lives volunteering for different organizations.
But we must agree that there has been a shift. It's not the traditional concept that we have in mind.
Yes,
as what we grew up with, perhaps.
Correct.
It's so different now, more so in the past few months.
Exactly. So the idea of being a farmer is now slowly shifting as well. And you never know. Eventually, these IT-based services would then be focused on how do we work on agricultural products. Right.
So would you say it's only now, which would be the way forward for self-consumption or small-scale business?
I think it's a little bit of both. You need the small-scale businesses to buffer. You need the decentralized models to also make sure that the community can be a bit resilient. But at the same time, as farms, there are always going to be advantages to economies of scale, so that large farms are always going to be a huge source of production.
That's right. Our topic today, enticing youth to agribusiness. We've picked the brains of Darren. Thank you so much, Darren. My final question to you is, in its entirety, what do you make of this all, of our topic today? What do you make of agribusiness moving forward, particularly for the youth?
I think it's a growing opportunity that is worth exploration, but we should also look deeper and see what are the patterns in our consumption that will affect this whole industry. The problem is actually quite deep. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Darren, for your time. It was, I think, an insightful conversation. And of course, we hope that we've answered all your questions. I believe we have. The recording of this particular episode will be emailed to you, and you can also get a copy of Darren's slides on WIEF's website as early as next week. This wraps up this edition of this discussion, this episode, of course, Think Talk, enticing youth to agribusiness. Thank you very much, Darren, to the organizers as well, ThinkTalk, WIEF, and WIN, thank you very much for putting this together, and to all our participants today. So many of you joined in, asked your questions as well. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Until next time, take care and stay safe. See you later. Bye-bye.